This is Rajendra Kumar. In March 2022, Kumar broke the Guinness World Record for the world's longest continuous laugh, chuckling like a Geordie frog for 3 hours and 47 minutes. Now, we don't know by just how many days Eddie Jones will have broken Rajendra's record until the coach Bill Sweeney kicked into the sun last December actually stops laughing, but if the 80 straight minutes thousands of rugby fans achieved on Saturday is anything to go by, he could well be going strong until the end of this year's Rugby World Cup, at least. This weekend, a mighty, majestic French team massacred Angleterre, 7 asides and 53 points, lighting up Twickenham. The most glorious fireworks playing their part in burning the entirety of West London down. As England suffered, let's just take a second to count all of the records broken. Their third biggest defeat of all time, their biggest loss ever to France, their greatest losing margin in a 4, 5 or 6 Nations Championship game ever, their largest half-time deficit they've ever suffered with a coach other than Clive Woodward in charge, the most tries they've ever conceded at Twickenham, and indeed England's biggest ever loss at home, overtaking the 43-6 battering by South Africa in 2008, where England were captained by a certain Mr. Steve Borthwick, poor guy. So, how did France click so heavily? What the hell is wrong with England? Are France back on course for Le Coupe du Monde? And are there any shining lights and positive moments from an English perspective? Is a good question. Saturday's test probably shell-shocked a fair few England fans, but the smiles it brought everyone else were not merely a Welsh, "Way, take that Clive Woodward and colonialism, everybody hates England" kind of thing. As fans of rugby, you couldn't help but be overcome with the pace, style and utter joy France were playing with. This felt like the ultimate culmination of everything Fabien Galtier had been trying to build, and boy was it glorious! Power unlocking panache, physicality allowing for flair, and the ever-smart kicking game opening up so much space to run that egg bastard until it boiled. France men kick more of the ball than any other team in World Rugby, but nobody ever minds because their non-stop wellying is entirely a ploy to put them on the front foot and open up space. Yet they went one step further this weekend as they even turned the old traditional exit kick, the clearance from your own 22, into an attacking weapon. And I don't just mean Dupont doing this because he's bullshit level skillful. The setup here is simple but beautiful. Olivon takes it off the kickoff and France set up a structure off Untermack at 10. He skips straight to Aldrit, the English defence knowing they also need to watch Willemse and Ramos, so we're able to put much pressure on him, plus having focused primarily on Untermack as a kind of clearance threat. And whilst Genge can drop Aldrit quickly, France play bloody fast ball to say it's their own 22 and it's an exit. England's defence isn't set up to apply any pressure anymore at all. Sinclair is the only forward on his feet here, and all three of these French backs are properly threats. Slade has to stop and cover them, make sure he's watching each of them individually, meaning nobody applies any pressure at all to Untermack, giving him time not just to welly it, but aim it properly. There's nobody on this touchline, the team having set up to cover Dupont's box kicking clear on the far side. Freddie Stewart regularly, as I mentioned last week, sweeps round to cover box kicks himself rather than staying in the fullback position in the middle, so he's having to readjust completely, and whilst he can get there in time, he's totally isolated. The English forwards, taken in by Aldrit and Olivon's carries, are on the far side, and none of his back threes come with him, so Stewart smartly abandons all ideas of a counter-attack and just has to run in field to try and get close to his forwards, knowing he'll lose the ball for certain next phase if he doesn't. The tackle is made, and Dante, a proper real breakdown threat finally back in the French team, enters first. And whilst a few English forwards have got there in time, they're hurried and they trip over Paul Willemse first, and then Chesham, making a good attempt to secure the ball, accidentally bowls Jack Van Poortvliet over. The scrum half is going in to pick up the ball rather than entering low to clear out, and it just causes the entire English effort to topple. The ball spills out, Fickou fixes 2, and then Cyril Bay doesn't give a pass that so almost would have gifted France the opening try. England stop it, but it causes chaos in their defence. Aldrit picks and goes, prompting the forwards to tie in close, but the backs are in equal disarray. With Stewart only just getting up off the floor, Slade has dropped into fullback, a ploy they ran regular in Eddie Jones, so Stewart slots in on the wing, and Lawrence defending in the midfield alone. He doesn't fly up with his teammates, and it allows Untermack to send a wide ball to Francois Cross, who steams over him, and suddenly the English defence is even more of a mess. The forwards are needing to work stupidly hard to get to the fringe. Genge has only just set into position, so is a second slower to get into position to eat Dupont, allowing him to skip outside, and with Watson having come up from the backfield, almost deliver what almost certainly would have been a second try scoring pass in sequence. Knowing their shape is a mess, England then go, right, okay, we just need to kick this away and just reset, hoping that will give them a new chance to get into shape, but, well, France. Untermac just dances around a bit, only aiming to stay on his feet long enough to give his team time to set around him, and Ramos, who's played plenty of 10 at club level, organised a shape with Untermac on the ground. And this is where the work France did previously to unravel the English defence really now pays dividends. Now, in a situation such as this, England ideally want a back rower or a toge here, just inside Slay's position, allowing each of their backs to start wider and hence be able to plug inwards if needed, but also the forward can drift outwards, they can kind of cover far more space. Except, the one phase England had the ball, they invited height magna oblong Jack Willis to carry. This means, once they do kick, Willis is, obviously because he was the guy that just carried the ball, going to be the last player to rejoin the defensive line and follow up. And instead of heading into a realistic position of near the ruck and hoping other players bounce out one, Willis heads instead into his ideal position, trying to fill the gap. This is aided by 3 French players here who just linger in the English line. They're not causing obstruction, but if Willis did slot in tight and each English player wanted to jiggle along one on the line, they bump into and need to work around each of these big lumps of French meat. Look how far Genge has to run to cover, because he's sort of half assumed Aldry is on his team because he's stood in the line here. Willis not being in position prompts Slade to fly in because he's needing to cover 2 people's work, and Untermac's lovely ball skips him easily, taking everybody in white but Lawrence out the game. Olivon's forward momentum allows him to win the collision and free an arm, and Flamont's support line is superb. Now, I'm not going to say the thing, but it's kind of like a fly halves line, starting inside and wrapping around to stay alive as a ball player. Willis is left flailing and it makes Malin's cut in, but Flamont edges out to link up, get closer to his support. Demortier then backs his pace, gets on the outside, and Ramos gets even more on the out. He gets on the outside of the outside, and the sheer numbers available overwhelm England and take France to a truly remarkable start. It was a pretty bleak beginning to the game for England, but there is, in microcosm, a few signs that they can fix problems on the fly in these grim early exchanges. France then go to run exactly the same exit tactic off the kickoff. The next time, Aldry once again crashing it up off 10 whilst Untermac sets deep to kick, and knowing it worked because of quick ball, Ludlam goes hell for leather to slow it, allowing time for Chesham to get opposite Untermac. Except he gets penalised in the process. France promptly get downfield, they kick 3 points, and it's 10-0, it's all getting very ominous, and France look to run it a 3rd time off the next kickoff. And realising Ludlam's all-or-nothing approach backfired on them, England problem solve. They switch up their defensive line, leaving the initial space light, and don't look to pressure Untermac as a kicker, instead focusing solely on Aldrit, getting Dombran and Genge, 2 of their hardest hitters, flying up in his space to catch him 10 metres behind the game line. It also means Untermac then has to backtrack to get into position. He's basically taking the ball stood in his own goal line, and none of these runners off him are realistic runners anymore. The post is very much in the way. The post is his best option to pass to. It's Toby Flood would love it. Chesham can pressure the kick, and Untermac gets it away under huge pressure. From the next kickoff then, Untermac doesn't bother trying to be offensive in his clearance, just thumping it straight, and it goes directly into Stuart's hands like he's Wales or something, who hangs then in turn a fantastic bomb that allows England to isolate Untermac as the ball taker and win a penalty deep in French territory. They then truck and trailer them all and blow the whole chance and give France a penalty moments later, but it shows that Steve Borthwick's side are capable of solving issues teams are posing them in real time. They just then stand on their own feet immediately afterwards. I'm not sure if chucking feces on a red rose would help fertilise it, but if you do dig through the performance that produced a truly dog shit result, there are some genuine positives and suggestions that more such troubleshooting could be on the way from Steve Borthwick. Eddie Jones may be off in Tasmania laughing like a hyena who just watched Hot Fuzz for the first time, but the ideal of positionless rugby he'd been working on for the last 2 years, abandoning the 1-3-3-1 type set structure that had governed sides for a decade in order to innovate on the fly, is now being adopted and adapted by Nick Evans. This system means you can react to a defence and exploit it much easier, but the downside of it, the real problem that is coming up more and more often for England, is that you fall out of shape so much easier because the players don't always know where they're heading once they get up off the ground. It's easy for an attack in a positionless rugby tactic to become as squalid as this, England unable to get anything going. Marcus Smith is personally having to reorganise the team phase by phase, controlling and adapting the shape constantly, and that, more than any team selection issue, hamstrings him, because Smith simply has to remain on his feet. He can't engage the line too aggressively, else the team lose their shape and pattern on the next phase, if not the next 2 or 3. However, not only did all of that change once Owen Farrell entered the arena, but having 2 playmakers allowed them to also organise separate waves of the attack. England suddenly having a feasible second line whenever attacking, with both Smith and Farrell on the field, making them so much more difficult to defend and ultimately creating the try for Freddie Stewart. It all clicks after Smith here invites Stewart on a superb carry. Smith and Itoje flow in front of the second wave, and England have feasibly 7 attackers here, facing 3.5 defenders, and Farrell's role is superb. He's brilliant. He hides himself here, but Dumortier is sharp and always watching him, so Faz uses that. He targets Dumortier, exploiting Ramos's effort to cut off his other options. They're all so flat that he can thread an absolutely superb ball through to Ludlam. Sometimes this kind of continuity and baffling of a defence is the main benefit of having 2 waves of attack, but we see a very different boon here. England smash it up through Smith's group first time, and then Farrell's posse can float around and become the primary group on the next phase, allowing England to play exponentially faster, but because Smith can slot in at 10, the Fazmeisters can get all the much wider, allowing them to overload Penno and exploit the fact that Undermack is only just drifting into position. Stewart draws him and puts Watson into a lovely hole. England play a smash up next here, and in the next phase, Smith carries himself. Now in the no Farrell days, this would have been attack over. It would have been the end. But Genge sorts himself a tip on here, and Farrell wraps around the backs, allowing them to continually shift the point of focus. Fickou is fixed on the far wing, and once Farrell sends Lawrence over the top of Dante, the French defence is entirely composed of just forwards filling in, just panically trying to take roles. No one's organising anything. Mitchell plays another phase as fast as anything, then England look to work back the other way, where a huge, just bloody big hole has conveniently opened itself for Frederick Stewart. So the question is, how? And the answer is, as ever, Owen Farrell. Why did I do that voice? As Lawrence carries, Francois Cross goes, a rock. Well, I am hungry, and goes to contest, and Farrell in turn blows him off the ball. Then he goes one further. He tackles him, holds him on the ground, shoves him on the floor. So much so that Cross is still stumbling to his feet as the ball comes out. Now, the Sean Edwards defensive system likes to have 3 forwards fold around to far side of the ruck every time, continuing in the direction the player's been going. It wants them working hard, but they work somewhat too hard here. Without Cross, Dante has to come round to stand on the fringe of this ruck, and it opens up a huge hole for Smith to fill that normally would have been Dante's space. He runs the line brilliantly and just carries Ramos over the line with him for good measure, you know? It seems like a fun way to spend a Saturday afternoon, carrying Thomas Ramos with you. People can argue all day long about whether Smith and Farrell work together. There's a prime moment of things not clicking in Damien Penaud's second try, where France try to overload Dave Ribbons in midfield, and both Smith and Farrell make extremely different defensive reads on the same situation. If either one did the same as their teammate, this is snuffed out no problem. As it is, Farrell takes one approach, Smith takes another approach, and Penaud can just bring his howler monkey laugh to Twickenham for all to hear, and Eddie Jones can no doubt emulate halfway through his 17-month laughing spree. But the point is, the system Nick Evans is implementing basically requires, in order to be properly effective against a modern defence, 2 playmakers, which, if he is on the Stuart Barnes side of the debate and feels Smith and Farrell don't work together, could present a bit of a dilemma for old Steve Borthwick. And it's one that Fabien Gauthier has very much solved, because Jonathan Dante returned to this team and was spectacular. The addition of a back who's a genuine jackal threat was such a weapon for France that they used to their fullest, and his assorted other, let's say, gifts allowed us to see the absolute best of Rugby Union's Chuckle Brothers, Roman Untermack and Antoine Dupont. Let the gushing begin. This is unreal by Dupont. The chip over the top is fantastic, but then he switches and stabs his absolutely perfect kick through with the other foot. Not the one he just kicked off, the other foot. Try that. Try doing that and realize how hard that is. It sits up right before the goal line. It's absolutely pitch perfect. It's amazing, and forces Marcus Smith to play it, granting France a scrum 5. Dumortier grounds Marcus Smith. He's the first person to ever score a try by grounding a Marcus Smith rather than a ball. It's similar to this, the little freak dummying a kick off one foot and then torpedoing it off the other, sending it perfectly as well. And this is maybe the most impressive bit of an all-round glorious performance. Last week, as I mentioned, shone a spotlight on how Freddie Stewart loves to switch position with his wingers and get himself onto the wing under any high balls being hung, and Dupont exploits that, swinging back towards the side he just left, abandoning the box he's about to hang, and sending it swinging backwards to the side he just left, and sailing it into English territory for a 50-22. It's amazing. The second try by Charles Olivon is mostly just a freak genius intervention, but a word for Dupont's involvement here. He picks Smith up like he's Mac Hansen or something, and then this is superb by Thomas Ramos, entering low and driving upwards, allowing Dupont to pick Smith back up right as he's hitting the deck. It makes the English ruck so much more scrambled, everyone out of position, eventually leading to the kind of mess that Olivon can just reach over, take the ball, and yoink, dot it down. But then, oh boy, then we have the second try by Thibaut Flamand. France's forwards are playing very simple crash at rugby, but it's a real strength of theirs, this kind of submerger tactic that has them flood oppositions with endless forwards on each other's shoulders. But whilst England are distracted by the rare French bulk, Dupont is simply scanning. He's just looking around, looking ahead, seeing what's on. Then he turns to Untermack and he says one simple syllable. Whatever it is brief, and Untermack doesn't react at all. He does nothing, but he doesn't have to. Dupont has spotted how wide Watson and Stewart are in the backfield, covering either wing each. Knowing a dink between them, France may not get there first, but it will definitely bounce, and that's all France need. This is a blind spot England are happy to leave, because a kicker's body language normally tells their opposite man, the defender here, that a chip is coming and they can therefore turn and recover, but Untermack's non-reaction really sells this. He's just lingering around, watching Dupont boss the forwards. No England player has even turned until well after the ball has left the boot. It's already in the air, it's already going, and Untermack is at full speed on the chase. Flamand was wrapping around from the short side just as Dupont gave his one-word instructions, so joins Untermack in behind, smartly positioning himself as support rather than rushing to chase the kick as well. And it allows for this. Roman Untermack, without a single glance once at Flamand, launching himself in the air to give the softest tap into his teammate's hands. He never thinks about the catch, the tackle, anything else. It's always this, the dimp into Flamand's arms. It's a brilliant finish from there, but as with his pass on the moment I married a few years ago, Roman Untermack's spatial awareness makes NASA jealous. He's more in control of his surroundings than the malignant ghost of Tutankhamun and can do so much with a rugby ball so effortlessly, as an Englishman, William Webb Ellis is probably wishing he did pick it up and just keep hold of the bastard pigskin to himself for forever. Worth noting as well that France here stabbed for a similar kick, and Dumortier chases with no intention of regathering himself as well, rather to knock back while Dreet, who's following up on a similar line. Maybe this is a stretch, but there's a degree to which this could have been practiced and rehearsed by France. It's certainly maybe a thought they've had on a training pitch at some point. France's flair spoke for itself. Their unbelievable power screamed for itself and gifted them this try for Charles Ollivon. Their kicking game spoke for their attack, but the other real standout about France was their tiny little moments of superb nuance and nuisance throughout the game. France are on a pretty good Marseillaise here, but Marcus Smith makes an amazing tackle on Dante to stop him in his tracks behind the game line, and so France go, fine, time for Le Bastard. Instead of clearing out, Fickou runs in and gives Ollie Lawrence a shove, which knocks him into both Willis and Ludlam, the only two England forwards folding around to this side. This stems the speed they can get into position, and Willis stops to check what Dupont's up to for a moment rather than just filling in, and sure enough, what Dupont's up to is he's picking up fast ball and propelling Flamand into a gap created by Fickou's intervention. Willis is unable to get anywhere near, the entire English fold devastated by one little push by Fickou. Flamand's line is lovely. He slowly works around and then picks it late, absolutely steaming onto the ball and riding the tackle to take him over for the try. And here, man, this is good bastardry by Francois Cross. Dombrandt runs at him and he goes, holy shit, if I tackle him, I get to have a ruck. I love ruck so much. So he just smokes him. Dombrandt is headed in with pace, but he matches the impact and drops him right away. And then, boy, is this good. He goes for a dummy jackal. He goes in high over the ball, a position that someone like him who had posters of great breakdowns on his wall as a kid, I'm talking about like Tom Cruise on Oprah, would know well isn't going to work. You want to be going in low on this kind of clear out. He lifts his arms to make a big show of the fact he's about to go for the ball, at which point two England players go mid and smash him off the ball, just get him out the rug. Except what he's done is he's taken out the only two English players that are in any position to support and presented a clean ball for Gregory Aldrit to drive over and win. Willemse joins in, then Cross himself hops in going, oh, rock. And soon enough, Keith O'Ben awards the penalty to France in the English 22. It's fantastic. Seriously, Francois Cross is well underway to becoming a proper favourite here at Squidland. I panicked and named it that. Here's the thing, right? As the comment section will no doubt inform me, right? This was a long way to say France were bloody excellent, but they were. Every part of the game clicking, and they even overcame a pretty great haymaker from England in the second half, as though it barely connected, as though it was nothing, to pummel their body into the sort of display of senseless, endless violence that we all know makes Eddie Jones giggle, because every problem England had on Saturday is fixable, but most of the weaknesses that France really ripped into are things Ireland are even better at exploiting. When Steve Borthwick first took over at Leicester Tigers mid-season, he wrote the first 8 or 9 games off as chances to experiment and play and work out his best team and combinations and tactics and what have you. I wonder if that's going to be his approach now for 2023, because look, let's put it this way. Here's some live footage of me changing the title of that Eddie Jones deep dive I made last year. And As for France, an utterly glorious team playing glorious rugby that everyone is so overjoyed to watch every single week, boasting players I feel genuinely privileged to get to watch in their prime. I'm fully aware in decades to come we'll be regaling, possibly boring, future generations with tales of how we watched Untermack and DuPont play in their prime, a couple on track to be regarded as the best halfback combinations since Edwards and Bennett, maybe even go on to surpass them in rugby folklore forever. A French team for the ages, hurtling towards a home World Cup, and aware a big win next weekend might be enough for them to lift a championship trophy. A team that nobody ever wants to take their eyes off, who can produce magic like this and performances of such spellbinding, beautiful rugby that you just feel like you're falling in love with the sport again for the first time. As for that team, I'm not going to watch their game next weekend. Bye!
England were well beaten today.
Yeah, we were. By 43 points.